Joining us today to discuss China's debt management plan and the wider economic challenges it faces is Mr. Maher Firzil, Director for the European Asian Center and former advisor to the World Bank. Welcome, sir, to QNews.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Sir, what does hidden debt mean in the context of Chinese local governments, and why is it a pressing issue?
I'm delighted to join you today from Paris. It's a very good question. It's interesting,
Thank you,
the
sir.
symbolism and the timing is interesting because, of course, what's happening in Beijing today is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening precisely 2.5 days after the surprise victory of Donald Trump in the US. Of course, the two issues are intimately connected. China's present and future economic issues or problems, and the fact that in less than 2 months now, Donald Trump will be the new US president. It's interesting because the Chinese government is very secretive and they don't like to speak in public, and they try not to communicate too much in public. But today, Lan Foan, the new finance minister of China, held a rare press conference. He doesn't do it very often, and he spoke more than usual. So it's interesting because we have a partial window, into the thinking of policymakers at the highest levels in Beijing. I think the news is rather bad. To make a long story short, I think it's maybe too little too late. So I think that the Chinese government was a little complacent regarding that festering wound, right? So the festering real estate finance crisis. It's been with them for 18 months or even 2 years. And every quarter or every semester, the crisis accentuates. They come back, they do some fiscal economic stimulus, waving the magic wand of macroeconomic stimulus. And for a few weeks, the symptoms of the fever recede. And then 2 months later, there's a new round of issues. So to make a long story short, they're
Sir,
not having.
sorry to interrupt you, but you said surprised victory of Donald Trump. Why do you see the victory of Donald Trump from your own perspective surprising?
Surprising because maybe not in Cairo or Riyadh, but certainly in London, Paris, or Washington, most of the so-called experts, that's 80–90% of academics, journalists, experts, pollsters, had predicted an easy victory for Kamala Harris, especially in the last days. The last days, they all said, oh my God, Trump is collapsing. So it's a big victory because he not only won the number of states he needed to qualify, but he also won the popular
Sir,
vote.
relate this to China, please, because I want it to be about China.
So that an acceleration. So policy planners in Beijing and Washington call it Cold War II. So what is Cold War II? It's an acceleration of the new Cold War. And that war will be fought between China and America for the next 10–20 years, not using missiles or nuclear engines. It will be fought using two things: financial power, investment, and high-tech research.
Basically, trade, sir.
Yes, and trade in the middle. So the third item is trade, but more important than trade, because trade already after COVID or during COVID, we had, the global shipping lanes and transportations were disrupted. So already, and they've slapped tariffs. So America and Europe have already slapped high tariffs on China. So trade is done. The next step of that new Cold War revolves around investment, FDI.
Okay,
Foreign
sir,
direct.
how do you assess the 6 trillion yuan plan to refinance local government debt? And do you think it's sufficient?
No, it's not that bad, but it's clearly not efficient. And the Chinese themselves, the finance ministers himself, during the press conference, hinted in a way, if you read between the lines, that it would not be enough because he said, and I quote, that he stands ready in the future to do three things: recapitalize big state-owned banks, buy unfinished real estate projects, and strengthen consumers. So when you have a finance minister who says, I'll stand ready to do much more in the coming weeks after putting $1.5 trillion on the table, it means there is a deeper problem. The Chinese know it. They can handle it, but it will be a painful road for China for the next 12 months.
Okay, sir, what challenges do you foresee in implementing this plan effectively over the next 3 years, sir?
Well, the biggest challenge is it's not enough. It's coming too late. So at provincial level, at local level, municipalities, counties, provinces, there's a big problem. So the Chinese government itself, not only the banks, they need to recapitalize their provincial governments, which are highly inefficient. It will cost a lot of money. It will be complicated because they're tied to the ruling Communist Party, so they cannot squeeze them financially too hard. Then there is the biggest problem, which is FDI, foreign direct investment. One of the big engines of the Chinese economic miracles was there were trillions of dollars coming every year into Shanghai, Hong Kong, Beijing from Canadian, Australian, American, English pension funds, insurance companies, industrial companies. These gigantic Western, North American pension funds and industrial companies, they're investing less and less into China. So foreign capital will be missing. Doesn't mean China
Why are
cannot
they
survive.
investing less now, sir?
Because of that new Cold War, precisely because America is saying, okay, many of the technologies that you invest in China are dual use. They can be civilian or military. So you can use an engine to produce a car, but you can also use an electric engine to make a missile. And so they're putting pressure, the Americans, and now the Europeans too, they're putting pressure on investors not to invest in China. So these big investors are afraid, and progressively, they're transferring their investment away from China to Singapore, India, Malaysia, Indonesia. It's also part of the supply chain crisis. They're moving factories away from China to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, India. All is happening at the same time. So China will have to bite the bullet. And I think one factor which could help China bite the bullet is the Arabian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, they believe in China and they don't want to see China fail. So Arabian Gulf, sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, they will keep on investing in China, but it's not enough to make up for the loss of American and European money. But China has many things, China has many advantages like technology, research, hard work. So China can survive the crisis, but it will be a painful crisis in the short, medium term.
Yes, sir. Of course, we all wish China all the best because we know that China is one of the strongest economies all over the world. And thank you very much, Mr. Maher Nicolas Firzil, Director for the European Asian Center and former advisor to the World Bank, for your valuable insights, sir.